Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this instalment, Alicia Vikander is your new Lara Croft in this reboot of Tomb Raider. Lara Croft, played by Alicia Vikander, has tried to run away from her family legacy and inheritance ever since her father Richard, played by Dominic, mysteriously disappeared 7 years ago. But when she discovers her father's hidden life as an explorer, she decides to follow in his footsteps in pursuit of a mysterious island that houses the tomb of Himiko, believed to have command over death. Teaming up with Lu Ren, played by Daniel Wu, Lara must outwit a rival mercenary named Vogel, played by Walton Goggins, hired by a shadowy organisation called Trinity, and prevent the tomb's power from falling into the wrong hands. The popular video game franchise Tomb Raider has already been adapted to the screen twice before, the first time in 2001, directed by Simon West, and then that film's sequel in 2003, The Cradle of Life, directed by Jan de Bont. And if there was one thing that those two movies got right, it was the casting of Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft. She was perfect in that role. She had the right kind of poise and presence to carry it off, especially the original version of the character that was very confident and assertive and hypersexualized. But aside from Jolie, those films are terrible. They're so dull and so underwhelming that they wouldn't entertain 11-year-olds at a birthday party. And I should know, because I was the 11-year-old. Since the video game series got rebooted in 2013, that means that they have a clean slate to do a whole new film version based off that new series of games, with a different Lara and a different story to take inspiration from. And surely a decade and a half hence from the last Tomb Raider movie, maybe they would have learnt the lessons from their previous outings and delivered the fun, popcorn ride that we know that this license is capable of on film. Or not, because history repeats itself yet again. This new version of Tomb Raider is unbelievably boring, it has to be said, and barely an improvement on the earlier movies. Like its predecessor, if there is a redeeming feature, it's Lara Croft. If Jolie was spot on for that version of the character, so too is Alicia Vikander for this incarnation. And it's very hard to compare those two performances because honestly, they're playing two different Lara Crofts. They're coming out from two totally different angles. So Jolie was playing Lara as this fully formed entity, but Vikander isn't. This is very much an origin story. This is Lara still trying to find her feet. She's still quite vulnerable. She doesn't quite know what she's doing, and she makes mistakes along the way. This is very much in keeping with the more realistic tone of this new version that matches with the new game series. When we pick up with Lara at the beginning of the movie, she's kind of this little girl lost in that, yes, she's got this rock-hard resiliency within her, and she's got this very astute intelligence, and she refuses to give up, and she uses that whenever she's trapped in a corner to get out of that situation. But in spite of that, she still doesn't know what she's doing. She seems kind of aimless and directionless, and she's throwing herself into danger recklessly. And in some level, there is a feeling of resentment at the fact that her father left her behind, and she doesn't really want to be a part of the family legacy. She wants to avoid it as much as possible. And then she discovers her father's secret life, and suddenly she finds a sense of calling, a sense of purpose. And in a better film, that would have been the sort of backbone of the story, this father-daughter dynamic, in the fact that she's following in his footsteps, carrying on the family legacy in that way and not in a business sense. And it's a real pity because when Vikander actually gets a moment to act in this film, she inhabits Lara so well. She's an Academy Award-winning actress, and she is brilliant in this role, but the film's simply not interested in that. What it's interested in is action, and credit to Vikander, you can tell that she is really enthusiastic about this part. She is giving 110% in every single scene, especially in the action set pieces where you can tell that so much of it is actually her on screen. It's so frustrating to watch. She's a so much better Lara than this film deserves. You wish that the rest of the film was on exactly the same level as her. The big Problem is, they don't have a script. This is the big issue with the movie, in that there isn't really a story, there's a plot, but it's there to navigate between action sequences. So basically, it's, 5 minutes of people explaining exposition, and then cut to the next action sequence. Exposition, cut to the next action sequence. And in that sense, the movie is a very accurate representation of playing a video game, because so much of the movie basically is, here's an info dump, press X to continue. And I know what the film is trying to be. It's trying to be Indiana Jones. And the film makes no attempt to hide its inspirations here. They're not trying to dress that up. This whole father-daughter story, she discovers his notebook about this island and the traps that are on it, and you at that moment realise, oh, we're basically getting Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. When she's reading through this book, you almost expect Sean Connery to walk on screen going, "The penitent man shall pass," or someone to walk on screen going, "Junior!" But here's the thing, if you look at the Indiana Jones movies, their supporting casts are really distinctive. They get really memorable, witty lines, and you remember them. Even if they were a tiny little role, people reference those characters. That's not going to be a thing that happens in Tomb Raider. I think what sums up the approach to Tomb Raider's characterisation is that all of Vogel's little underlings and henchmen, they aren't given names. In the credits, they're simply called mercenary. No one, aside from Vikander, is really given much of a character to play. And what's baffling about that is this movie actually has a phenomenal cast when you look at it on paper, especially because they clearly shot a lot of this in the UK, so they cast a lot of local actors. So in the supporting cast of this movie, we have Nick Frost, Jamie Winstone, Kristin Scott Thomas, and Derek Jacobi, and they all appear for maybe less than 10 minutes. They appear in 2, maybe 3 scenes if they're lucky, and I'm betting that they were all shot in about a day. Why go to the effort of getting such distinct talent like that, and then not using them at all? The fact that Kristin Scott Thomas is in such a nothing part is almost an insult to her, but they're just coming in and cashing their paychecks, and they could have done something interesting with that cast, but nope, they're off screen for most of the movie. And really, the only person that brings an additional dimension to their character, aside from Vikander, is Walton Goggins. Walton Goggins is a brilliant character actor. I'm going to make a guess here and say that what he brought to the role of Vogel was not on the page. He's been on the island for the last 7 years. He was there alongside Lara's dad, and he's been sent by this mysterious organisation called Trinity. Trinity. Better make sure you remember that, because we're going to bait shamelessly for sequels at the end of this. But Goggins plays him as someone who is totally and completely exhausted. He just desperately wants to finish his job and go back to his family. And he doesn't really care at this point. He doesn't care what's actually in the tomb so much as there's something there that he can bring back to the people that he's working for. And you know what? That dimension works for that character. That makes him stand out amongst the sea of blandness that is the rest of this movie. And if you really want to see just how thankless this movie can be, then you only have to look at Daniel Wu, or as I like to call him, blatant attempt to pander to the Chinese audience. He's a character that Lara meets up with about a third of the way through, and they become sidekicks throughout the rest of the movie, because you see Lara's father turn to his father, who was also a captain, to bring him to the island, and so she's going to turn to the son to bring her to the island, and wouldn't you know it, they form such a connection together because they literally have the exact same backstory. Oh yes, this movie is so lazy, they literally just write a male version of Lara and make almost no attempt to differentiate them. And this character is so peripheral, so useless, that at certain points in the movie, he disappears and then just reappears with scarcely a moment's explanation. There's one point in this movie where it looks like his character dies, and then he's just suddenly back again. And you spend the rest of this movie wondering, is he going to become useful? Is he actually going to factor into the plots in a significant way? And the answer is, no, he doesn't. He's just hanging around the entire time, and the only reason he's here is so they can have this big name actor from that territory, they can splash his face on a local poster and sell a few more tickets in that territory. And I know what you're probably saying to yourself, well, I don't care about story in a Tomb Raider movie, how's the action? And you know what, I could give this movie a pass on a certain level if it was good at that, but it really isn't. It's terrible at the action stuff. And it's clearly one of those movies where they shot all the big set piece moments with about 16 different cameras and then felt compelled in the edit to use every single one of them, because all the action sequences in this movie are chopped up like it's a kebab. It really doesn't put its best foot forward when, in the film's very opening moments, we get this MMA fight that Lara's participating in, and it's so erratic and all over the place that you can barely tell what's going on. At points in this movie, it's totally incoherent. Really, I think it says something about how bad the action is in this movie. The best action set piece in the film is a throwaway bike chase that happens 15 minutes in and has virtually nothing to do with anything. It's that bad. There are points where the editing so sabotages exactly what's going on that it's a total failure to actually, you know, tell a coherent story on a visual level. There's a chase scene where Lara is going after some thieves that have stolen a bag in Hong Kong, and she runs through somewhere and she trips over a table, and then jump cut, she's running out of a door ahead of the thieves. What? That's two completely contradicting things. How did that happen? What? It's just bewildering at certain points, and it feels like the movie is intentionally trying to spite itself. There's a scene where Lara is swimming away from a shipwreck in the middle of a storm that turns into an epileptic's nightmare. The screen just keeps flashing over and over again, completely unnecessarily. You know what, for the tomb, how about we make all the walls black or dark grey so that you can barely tell what the hell is going on screen? That sounds like a really great idea. There's this whole set piece on an abandoned plane that's hanging over a waterfall and that's sort of decaying and falling apart. And this whole sequence is ridiculously contrived, but in a way that you would expect from a video game. The plane's wing is suddenly collapsing under your weight, gotta jump across. Okay, you've made it onto the plane, now suddenly the plane is collapsing, even though it was apparently here for years. Luckily though, you just gotta grab a parachute that's right in front of you. It feels like in action sequences, you're just watching someone do a playthrough. It looks like a let's play in that you're waiting for QuickTime event prompts to come on screen. Everything comes so easy for Lara. If Lara needs something at any given moment, it will suddenly manifest itself in a way that she can easily grab it and make use of it. And it undermines the tension in every single sequence because she doesn't actually have to use her intelligence or any sort of astuteness to get out of what she's doing, because the film just keeps offering it up to her time and time again. And there's no weight or stakes to anything that's happening on screen because there's no characterization to speak of. There's a fight scene where Lara has to wrestle another man and kill him in cold blood, and that's clearly meant to be this big moment. It's meant to be this really kind of nasty, ugly scene, and it is for the wrong reasons, in that it's in this really dark conditions and you can barely make out what's happening, and either way you don't really feel anything about it because who was that guy? Really, who was he? Why should we care that he's dead? And that's really unfortunate. And the whole midsection of the movie just turns into a slog because it just basically goes exposition, action sequence, action sequence, action sequence, just inundates you and you just stop caring after a certain point. Honestly, I found myself starting to sympathise with Vogel. There's a point late in this movie where he just says, "Can we just go home?" And you side with him. I do have to admit I was slightly more invested in the last section of the movie once they actually do some tomb raiding, because that takes well over an hour for them to do in this movie. But it wasn't because I was on its side, it was more because things have become so absurd and so ridiculous by that point that I kind of got some laughs. laughs out of it, especially in regards to the traps on the way to Himiko, which are so preposterous and so overly elaborate that Indiana Jones would piss himself laughing. There's a moment where they get sealed in a room and the floor's collapsing away, and it's a colour puzzle, so they have to find the right coloured key that will open the door and stop the floor collapsing apart. And this goes on for a stupendous amount of time. They just keep pulling keys out of the wall. Oh, we found a white one, we found a red one, we found a blue one, we found a yellow one. Like, how many keys are there in this thing? And at the same time, the floor is collapsing away, and really at the rate it was going, it should have killed all of them, but no, it just keeps on going, and characters are going, we're running out of floor! Yeah, I think Lara's aware of that. The floor underneath the door where she's supposed to be solving the puzzle totally gave way. She is hanging onto the door. How is anyone supposed to solve this? Who designed this? Why would they design it like this? I know you're not meant to nitpick this thing too closely, but even so, they really make no sense whatsoever. It basically turns into this stupid fun house. But at least there's some kind of sub-indie level thrills to be had here as they lift even more from Last Crusade, and characters spout nonsense lines like, this wasn't meant to keep people out, this was meant to keep people in. What? Whatever you say, I guess. And just to add insult to injury, there isn't even an ending. It just stops midway through baiting its largest cinematic universe. You know what? Maybe concentrate on a good standalone movie first. And it really is a kick in the teeth when it makes much of the preceding movie feel pointless and irrelevant. It honestly doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And we've gone through this whole movie with Lara, and it's only in the very final moments of it does Lara actually become the fully formed character that she was supposed to be. And it's basically, tune in next time. I mean, I guess as far as video game movies go, it's not unwatchable, unlike some. It's not the bottom of the barrel like something from Uwe Boll's back catalogue or Street Fighter The Legend of Chun-Li, but saying it's on the same level as Assassin's Creed is not exactly glowing with praise. Tomb Raider is a real letdown. Tomb Raider is exactly like watching someone else playing a video game and resembles a 2-hour cutscene. Despite a committed performance by Alicia Vikander playing a very different version of the characters to the one Angelina Jolie played, she's given very little to really work with. Nor is anyone else, despite a lot of recognisable British actors, with the exception of Walton and Goggins adding some welcome shading to his villain. It simply feels like a carbon copy of Indiana Jones without the wit or any of the characterisation, simply leaping from one hypercut, dimly lit action sequence to the next in a way that's mostly dull. When the film finally raises a tune in its final third and starts pilfering from The Last Crusade, things start to perk up a bit, but it's too little too late. And while it's probably one of the better video game adaptations, Tomb Raider is still not a very good film. In fact, it's barely better than the previous attempts 15 years ago. If you like this review, then you can unearth my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.